Danjo Danahichone. Welcome back, my beautiful friends, to another episode of Apache Stealth. Tonight's story, Help Wanted. Burro had finally found a motel that would allow him to stay. John was surprised to see how much trouble it was for his new friend, just because he was indigenous. After John left for home, Burro still needed to find work. Since he was feeling hungry, he remembered seeing a help wanted sign in a cafe nearby. He decided to seek employment there and get something to eat. Thank you, Great Spirit, for creating a cheeseburger and milkshake. Burro stood outside the moderate-sized cafe that had big windows. It was easy to see all the guests enjoying their meal inside. In the window next to the door was a sign that said Help Wanted. At the bottom of the sign was a handwritten word that said Cook. When Burro was 12 years old, he got his first full-time job as a dishwasher in the small town of LaRue, Arizona. By the time he was 14, he had made cook. This place is smaller than the Interstate Cafe. It will be easy to cook at this place. Burro opened the door and walked inside. Instantly, the restaurant got quiet. Behind the counter, a man wearing a tie was pouring himself a cup of coffee. He looked up to see an Indian standing at the door. His cup ran over, and the coffee stung his hand. Angrily, he sat the cup down hard on the counter.
Ellie, clean this up.
Ellie grabbed a towel and disappeared behind the counter as she wiped the floor.
Get out. We don't sip salt waters in here. If you want to place an order, go around to the back door.
I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. My name is Mako, and I saw you were looking for a cook. I have many years' experience.
Salt waters don't work here neither.
The waitress popped up from behind the counter. The white towel in her hand was stained brown from the coffee that spilled. Ellie grabbed a couple of napkins and handed them to her boss so he could dry his hands.
Nobody answered the help wanted ad. The cook quit over 3 weeks ago. The only reason you're still here was because you couldn't cook breakfast. You had to move the dinner cook to the morning shift.
Burro stood silently at the counter as he listened to what Ellie was whispering to the owner. He could clearly see that neither Ellie or the boss wanted an Indian working there. But they were obviously feeling desperate. The owner knew that if he were to allow a salt water to work there, more Indians would come seeking a job. He didn't want that to happen. Burro interrupted them. Excuse me, sir. I can cook breakfast, lunch, or dinner shift. I know how to bake breads and desserts. My schedule is flexible, so I can work any time. Let me work for you until you find another cook. After hearing what the native man said, Ellie and the owner continued discussing the circumstances. After a minute had passed, Burro could see that the boss was leaning towards letting him cook. Burro decided to seal the deal quickly. Excuse me again, sir. How about I make you this offer? I'll start right now. You don't have to pay me for today. Just give me a meal, and I will work the rest of the shift for free. If you like my work, then tell me to come back tomorrow. What do you say?" Burro knew he made the owner a deal he couldn't refuse. The owner didn't say anything. He looked at Ellie as she stared back at him for what seemed the longest time. Even the people in the restaurant were quietly watching. Finally, with great reluctance, the owner let out a sigh. Burro smiled.
Name's Mr. Cuddy. Call me sir or boss. I'll let you cook tonight, just for a meal. Then we'll see what happens. Follow me.
The boss turned and headed for the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. Burro started to follow him behind the counter when one of the customers spoke out.
You let that salt water behind the counter, Dennis, and none of us will come back.
Mr. Cuddy stopped in his tracks at the door. He turned and looked at the gray-haired man who was standing. Burro stopped just shy of the counter and looked at the man. His friends in the booth were also staring. In fact, Burro looked at all the faces in the cafe staring at him.
Come on now, Mr. Smith. You know I haven't been able to hire a cook for almost a month now. I don't care, Dennis. You let that salt water behind the counter and your business becomes a ghost town. You can't be serious.
The cafe could probably hold around 30 people when it was full, and since the dinner rush would be starting soon, the cafe was over half full. To Burro's amazement, all the customers had stood up. Mr. Cuddy looked around the cafe at the faces of his customers who were ready to leave. He looked at his waitress and saw that her mouth had dropped open. Overwhelmed, Mr. Cuddy looked at Burro. Burro nodded his head and thanked Mr. Cuddy anyway. He turned and headed out the door. Looking around, Burro wondered where the next restaurant was. He really wanted that cheeseburger and milkshake. Since Burro was the Haisje of his tribe, he wasn't supposed to eat foods that weren't prepared for him by his loved ones. But once in a while he would break with that. His people were accustomed to going to the back door to order food. But after seeing what happened at this little cafe, he really didn't feel like ordering a cheeseburger here. As Burro was walking through the parking lot, he heard a police siren. 2 police cars came to a screeching halt in front of him. "I'm going to jail for asking for a job? That gray-haired man must be important around here." Ellie saw what was happening in the parking lot. Even though she didn't care for salt waters, she thought this was going too far. As she ran out of the cafe, she could hear Mr. Cuddy yelling for her to come back. Burro dropped his D'akhenya bag on the ground and put his hands and his legs out to the side. This was the surrender position that all police expect you to do when being arrested. It also showed them he wasn't holding any weapons. As the officers were quickly getting out of their cars, Burro could see all the faces in the cafe. Unexpectedly, Ellie burst from the cafe. Burro shook his head, trying to warn her away, but before he could say anything, the officer from behind hit Burro in the head with his club. Burro went to sleep.
What did he do? Stop! Stop it!
Even though Burro was sleeping, they continued to beat him. Ellie's begging finally caused them to stop. They put the handcuffs on Burro. Dragging him to one of the vehicles, they threw him in.
What did he do?
As the officers got back into their cars, Officer Kelly told her, Burro had been caught trespassing and was resisting arrest. She watched the cars drive away, and she felt ashamed for what happened. When Ellie finished her shift at 10 o'clock, she headed home emotionally drained. She found her son fast asleep, and thinking about the day she had, she fell asleep too. The next morning when Ellie woke up, even though she slept hard, she still felt as if she hadn't slept at all. When she went to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee, Ellie found her son already dressed and eating a bowl of cereal.
You're up early.
Good morning, Mom. I had the most amazing day yesterday.
Ellie poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Her son began to tell her about an indigenous man he had met at the park with his friend Keith. At first, she was upset that John had been talking to a stranger, but she quickly figured out she had met the same man. When John was finished telling her his story, she was surprised to hear the lesson of the cake. Now she felt worse for the man who was sitting in jail.
I'm going to meet him again at the park at noon, unless he found a job.
Ellie looked at her son and wondered what kind of cake she was. I'm D'akhenya Montoya, creator, writer, artist, and musician for Apache Stealth. If you're new to Apache Stealth, you should start with the first story. Thanks for watching, and please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss the next story.